Hello and welcome to some new iRacing content that is coming up on the channel. It's the first of a series that I am going to be doing on the road to hitting 4K iRating, which I've been at previously. I've just had a series of results which kind of knocked me down a load of iRating back down into the high 3,700s, low 3,800s, and then yeah, I haven't really played iRacing in quite a while, and Le Mans was here in Season 4, Week 7 of the iRacing Le Mans series, and as the HBD is kind of my go-to car in iRacing, and Le Mans is a track that I know pretty well, it'd be a good I thought it'd be a good opportunity to jump back in and try and make the start of my comeback and getting to 4K once again here in this week. So this is the better races, or one of the better races that I had over the course of probably 4 or 5 race attempts that I did. Started off the week coming into it at 3,834 iRating, and then I did 2 races where I lost about it was 41 iRating, I believe it was. And I had a reasonable result and gained 39 of that back, so I got the majority of it back. But then I had another race where I had another pretty poor result and lost another 35 iRating. So we're coming into this one as basically my last attempt to try and regain some of the iRating and see if we can get ourselves closer to 4K. So we're in the HBD. We are starting from 6th position on the grid, and we're just basically in the process of the mini formation lap that they have here in iRacing on this Circuit de la Sarve. And as you can see, we're just trundling along at very low speed. Got myself sat in 4th gear, fuel mix 1, trying to use as little fuel as possible in this period in the lead up to the start, where we'll be taking the green relatively shortly. And for some of you eagle-eyed viewers may have just noticed that the camera is moving around a little bit here inside the cockpit. That's because I'm using TrackIR 5 in order to look around, and yes, I had just recentered the TrackIR, and there I am doing it again just as we're getting ready. So getting the call from my engineer saying we're about to go green as the French military does their little fly over the top, leaving the smoke trails, bring ourselves down into lower gears, ready to actually go racing, because obviously I want to stick with the pack. Got my fuel mix back up into fuel mix 8, so I've got maximum power possible starting from P6, and we've got the final chicanes here in order to deal with before we actually get to the start finish line. So just sort of slotting into single file formation, and now we're going to start pressing and see if we can get some positions here in this opening lap. You can already see that the leading pair in the HBD class is rumped off away and got a good few car lengths between themselves and the rest of the pack, although they have a little bit of a tussle there coming into turns 2 and 3, which is the Dunlop chicane, coming down underneath the bridge and down into the S's. We're right up underneath and on the rear of P5, so we want to try and see if we can get past this guy as soon as we possibly can and try and stick with the guys up in front. So we'll be looking for a good run through Tetra Rouge here. That was fairly decent, not running out too wide, carrying a fair amount of speed. Hopefully we can pick up the slipstream. So we're going to tuck in now on the first of these Mulsanne straights into the first Mulsanne chicane, and there you can see the toe coming into effect. So we're getting a slipstream now. Going to pull over to his right hand side. We're going to have the inside line for the chicane, creeping ourselves forward just ahead. There's a yellow flag just as we're coming into this first chicane, and he decides to back out of trying to defend the move too hard, and there is the reason for the yellow flag. We've got a slow LMP1 car rejoining back onto the circuit. So I need to play it relatively cautious around him. I was going to try and pick up a little bit of slipstream from him, but he seems to be slower. So we're actually going to move over to the left-hand side of the track as well to give some of the slipstream to the LMP1 car and take it away from the HBD that is there in 6th position behind me. I want to try and obviously retain this position, see if we can close up back onto the guys up in front and pull away from the guy who is now behind. And if you're wondering, the relative board there, it updates the positions at the start of each lap, which is why it's showing that I'm still in 6th when in fact I'm actually in 5th place. Again, he's getting a little bit close into Marsan corner, or in the braking zone for Marsan corner, shall I say. Oh, a little bit of oversteer there, as we were getting hard on the throttle. Just lighting up the rear tyres slightly, but holding on to that and correcting it quite nicely. But yeah, obviously he's very much there within my slipstream. Typically with these HPD cars, seems to be about 1.2 seconds. You get a decent tow off the car in front, so he's well within that, and in fact actually closing as we're coming up towards Indianapolis, but he doesn't go for the move and instead just sets in behind, probably thinking similar to me of just kind of trying to use me to try and close up to the guys up in front, which is what I'm hoping for. One of the reasons why I wanted to get past them as quickly as I could, so I can start hunting down P4, P3, P2 and P1 up in front of us. And there actually you can see we've got a nice little buffer now to Casper behind. We've got a decent drive coming off of Arnage as we're coming into the Porsche curves now. So we need a good smooth run through here. Try and maximise the downforce of the car and the car setup. Just being patient, not trying to take too much out of the tyres, and not run out too wide on the exit of the Porsche curves there, because you can get a slowdown if you go too far out. So we've got a driver peeling off into the pits as one of the LMP1 cars. Now just navigating the forward chicane, just taking the curves quite nicely, and that is lap 1 complete. So we're in a pretty good position at the moment, about a second to the guy behind and about a second and a half to the guys up in front, so I've got a little bit of work to do before I can start getting the tow from the car up in front of us and really kind of reel in the guys in front, but otherwise we're looking pretty good. P1 and 2 have swapped positions after their slight altercation going into turns 2 and 3 on the previous lap. So feeling relatively happy at the moment. Another reasonable run through Tetra Rouge, although kind of clobbered the curve quite hard on the inside, but nothing really came of that. And actually, this is pretty good and pleasing to see two guys immediately in front of us in 3rd and 4th position, battling away, coming down towards the first chicane, but they've traded positions relatively cleanly and smoothly without actually losing really any time. Would have been nice to have them kind of go side by side going into the chicane, and would have allowed me to close up quite a bit more, a fair bit easier, but alas, they got their position swapped round and was able to get a pretty clean run through the first chicane. We've taken about a 10th or so out of the guy who was immediately in front now through that chicane, just by having a smoother line and not having the car immediately there in front. So just continue to press on, see if we can close the gap to those two guys in front. For those of you wondering, the livery that I'm using on the car is that of Geodesic Racing. Been kind of somewhat racing with the guys for the last couple of years. For the last year or so, it's kind of been on and off. Not officially part of the team, I'm not included on their team roster, but yeah, I've been kind of lurking in and around the group for the last couple of years, done a couple of endurance races with them, and yeah, as I said, not really participated too much on the iRacing side of things. So hopefully, with all the racing sim content being able to go up on the channel from here on out, I can get back into iRacing, start racing for them more, represent them a little bit more, get some good performances and results in, and hopefully do a little bit more in terms of raising the team's profile and their kind of awareness within the iRacing scene. Hopefully that will allow me to get into being included as part of the official team roster over there at Geodesic. But it's also the reason why I didn't show the setup at the start of the video, because usually with my Project Cars 2 content I would share the setup that I'm using in the race, but as the setup is theirs and it is top secret stuff, unfortunately I'm not allowed to share it with you guys, so I apologise for that. But obviously I want to respect their rules, and setups is one of the things that they try to keep hidden as much as possible, because they do like to get involved with racing leagues and some competitions and potentially doing esports stuff in the future as well. So yeah, started lap 3 now. Things are looking pretty good. We've got ourselves within the second to the guy in front. They're looking in a pretty prime position to hopefully try and make a move within the next lap or so if we can get ourselves a little bit closer. He is losing time to P3, so I want to try and get past this guy as quickly as possible, and actually goes and makes quite a big mistake there through the ESs. Not entirely sure what happened. It didn't look like the car broke loose, just took a really poor line, possibly just a lapse in concentration, but that's brought us right up onto the back of his car. It's obviously dropped him off the back of P3, so he's not getting any slipstream anymore. I am. He's going defensive and hanging to the right hand side, forcing me to go to the left. So I'm going to be there on the outside on the approach to the first chicane, but we're eking ourselves ahead, and he goes and backs out and tucks in behind and lets me go through. So I don't really have to kind of fight for the position going into the chicane, and that's us now up into P4, but obviously you need to be careful because he is relatively close behind. I obviously want to try and push and see if we can close up to P3 as we just go and take a tear off there, off the helmet, which clears up the vision quite nicely. These are sunrise conditions here in this race, and you can see he's starting to close up in the slipstream, approaching the second chicane here. So we need a good smooth run coming through here and off the corner. Slight little twitch there from the rear of the cars. It's getting harder on the accelerator, but didn't really lose too much traction. But yeah, 2 seconds behind P3 now. And the guy behind is within half a second, so he's getting all the slipstream. Well, not all the slipstream, but he's getting slipstream. I'm not. So it's just a case of trying to pull the gap to him if I possibly can, but that wasn't the neatest of runs going through Mulsanne corner there. Just locked up the brakes just the tiniest amount as we were starting to ease off and turn in. Sent me just a metre or two too deep. Has put me in a vulnerable position on the run towards Indianapolis. As you can see, he's got a good slipstream and is there on my outside. I'm trying to defend the inside line, but as we come into the braking, it does manage to eke ahead, so decide to just tuck in rather than lose any more time. But this is not an ideal scenario, as I don't want to be trading positions with him every other corner. It's just going to cost us time through battling, so I want to try and get back ahead of him as quickly as I possibly can so I can focus on the guys up in front, as I do feel like I am quicker and that I'll be able to close up to P4. As you can see, side by side, got the inside line on the approach to the Porsche curves, so coming in into those corners now there, running a little bit deep, and he hangs relatively close. Tried to kind of somewhat defend it around the outside, but it didn't really work for him. So now we're back up into P4, and it's actually pretty crucial that I managed to get that move done and dusted there coming into the Porsche curves, because it will give me the clear air and the downforce that I need to go through those sequence of corners at full race pace essentially. Whereas obviously trailing another car, you get caught in the dirty air, you lose the downforce, and you'll start to drop back off them a little bit and lose some time. So now I'm back in front, half a second to the guy behind, 2.93 odd seconds to P3 in front of us. So I want to try and get my eyes forward now and focus on closing them down. Not the best of runs through turn 2 there, but turn 3 was pretty good. Now coming down through the S's in this kind of bowl shaped section of the track. Fairly good run through there, so now I just need to get a good run coming through Tetra Rouge, but turn into a little bit too late, dropping down the gear. That's going to cost me some speed and momentum, and as you can see from the lap delta on that Motec display behind the steering wheel, that I'm losing time. I'm actually half a second off of my previous fastest time, and it's also given the advantage to the guy behind. He's now much closer, got the slipstream as well, and as you can see, he's pulling up to my right hand side. I felt like he had too much momentum to really kind of defend that, so just let him go this time round. Slot in behind before we get into the braking zone. There's no point going side by side coming into the braking zone, it would just cost us even more time, so tuck in behind for now. We'll sit patient. We won't go for the move coming into the second chicane up the road up here. It's pretty difficult to get the move going into the Mulsanne corner unless you get an absolute monster run coming off of the exit of the second chicane. So my next best chance, really, next best overtaking opportunity, is going to be into Indianapolis. So we need a good smooth run through here. Could have been a little bit more aggressive on the throttle coming out through the exit. As you can see, it's cost me a couple of car lengths. But we'll be picking up the slipstream once again on the approach to the braking zone from Mulsanne corner. So we need to get a good run through that. Nail the braking point, nail the apex, and get a good drive coming off. So into the braking zone, getting the car slowed down, getting the car tucked in very nicely on the apex, which is good. Pretty poor exit though. Just start getting on the throttle a little bit too eagerly and a little bit too aggressively, seeing that the guy in front was shy of the apex and running a little bit deep as well. But now we're starting to get the slipstream on the run towards Indianapolis. This could be a little bit late going for the move, so I'm going to have to go to the outside as he's defending the inside. We've got a nice overlap here though. Try and hang it around the outside. We've got the inside now for Indianapolis proper. We have to shift down into first gear just in case he's going to try and slug it around the outside, but he doesn't manage to get the move done and stuck before the exit of there, so I was able to use the full width of the track. A decent drive off of Indianapolis, but not too great as he is right there with me. So we're going to face some potential defending coming into the Porsche curves, trying to make it a little bit tight for him on the approach. Coming in, I'm going to try and hang it around the outside here into the very fast right-handed entry, using all of the width of the track that's available to me, and also the curbing going through the first of the left-hander there. Just the very slightest of tiniest of touches between the two of us gave us a 0x car contact, as you can see at the top. But that was very much a big statement that I was wanting to make, to say that I want to be ahead of you. I believe I've got the pace to try and close up on the guys up in front. You need to stay behind and just leave me to it. I wanted to make that very clear to him. I think I did so there with that move, trying to hold it around the outside. Very, very close, quite risky in fact. But I mean, it's pretty fair play to the two of us. I gave him the room on the inside. He gave me the room on the outside as well. But he did kind of come across just the tiniest amount too much in the first of the two left-handers, and our cars just had the very slightest of brushes. I didn't really feel it through the force feedback. It didn't upset the car or anything. It just registered the car contact and displayed it at the top of the screen. But either way, the first part of the lap has been relatively good. As you can see, managed to get ourselves over half a second ahead of the guy behind. Still sat in P4. We're about 10th or so up on our previous fastest lap, so if we can get a good lap in here, we can see if we can try and start closing down the gap to the guy in front, who's managed to get himself about 5 seconds or so up the road from us. It's a good smooth run there through the first Mulsanne chicane. Still lurking about a 10th of a second up on the previous best, so I wanted to try and keep that pace up throughout the remainder of the lap, try and make no mistakes in order to try and build ourselves a bit of a buffer to the guy behind, try and get ourselves ahead of that 1.2 second threshold. But having said that, gone and made a bit of a mistake there coming through the second Mulsanne chicane and allowed the guy to close up right up onto the back of me once again. He's going to have to slipstream here and force him to go to the outside, coming up towards Mulsanne corner. It looks like he's going to just about eke a nose ahead of us, although we're pretty much level pegging. I've got the inside line, so I want to try and defend here. Just the slightest twitch under braking. Managed to keep it away from his car though. We do manage to hold on to that position. Once again, put my foot down and say, no, you are not coming through. I am holding on to this 4th position. And yes, I may be making the odd little mistake here and there, which may be costing us a little bit of time, but trust me, I know I've got the pace over you. I want to try and close up on the guys in front, and this battling is not helping us. Once again, he's closing up and trying to look to the outside, coming in towards Indianapolis. There on the inside, but I've got the outside coming into Indianapolis proper, and he's gone and snuck through once again. This is starting to get a little bit frustrating now, because this is going to cost us even more time than is absolute necessary. But once again, getting a pretty good drive coming off of the exit of Arnage. He was a little bit sideways, getting eager on the power. Got the inside line this time coming up towards the Porsche curves. Got a bit more of an overlap, and he's actually gone and backed out of that and lifted to let me go through before we actually get to the corner, because I think he has a pretty good idea as to what I was going to do when it comes to the Porsche curves, which was pretty much fight him all the way until I got that 4th position. So he conceded it early to avoid costing us any more time. Got the good run there coming through the Porsche curves, and I think he may have been a little bit wide coming out through the exit, so he's now having to back off and serve a slowdown penalty, which makes it so much easier for us to break away, because as you can see, he is now over 2 seconds behind us, which is fantastic news for us. It takes the pressure off. It means I don't have to worry about looking behind me anymore. I can now just focus on P3 and P2 up ahead, who are actually battling away and around about a second away from each other, so we need to try and get some good runs through these corners in the early part of the lap. So coming down through the S's, a little bit shy of the apex there, didn't go too deep. Chucking the car into Tetra Rouge, just about managing to get the car back over to the edge of the circuit to avoid the slowdown penalty that is out there on the exit of that corner coming out onto the straight. Essentially just need to get your tyres back over and over the white line before the end of the curbing, and you'll be alright. You'll avoid the slowdown penalty. Good smooth run there through the first Mulsanne chicane. The tyres lit up a tiny little bit, getting hard on the accelerator, but not too bad. It looks like we're sat about 5.8 seconds behind P4, so I want to try and start working on that gap and bringing that down. P1 is pretty much checked out. He's now out of the picture. This is a good 16 seconds up the road from myself. He's got himself well clear of P2. So just a quick check behind just to see if there's any LMP1 cars that's kind of coming up behind us at any point, either through lapping, although it's quite early for lapping. Slight mistake there through Mulsanne chicane. But yeah, the LMP1 cars won't be lapping us yet, kind of in more around the pit stops, in and around lap 9, lap 10. But I was also just double checking just to see if any of the earlier LMP1 cars who had some troubles on the first lap were starting to come up behind, and then obviously double checking up ahead just to see where the tail end of the GTE field is as well. So this is a multi-class race for those who aren't familiar with the iRacing Le Mans series. 3 classes. The LMP1 cars, these HPDs, which kind of acts as like an LMP2, although they're quite outdated compared to the rest of the cars on the grid. And then obviously the GTE class as well. And these races are an hour long, 60 minutes in total. Can only take 45 kilograms of fuel in the fuel tank of the HPD, so we'll need to make a pit stop in this race, but I won't need to make a tyre change. Tyres will quite comfortably do the full race distance, although some of the previous races that I had done during the week had been struggling with tyre wear, and the tyres weren't feeling too great when it came to the last 2 laps. But I've made some tweaks to the setup, which has made the car a little bit more comfortable to drive pretty much all the way around throughout the entire duration of the race, and all the way around the lap as well. And it felt a lot more familiar to how I remember the HBD and how it drives back when I used to drive it. And although there wasn't any official changes, I do believe there was some stealth changes made to the car through various patches throughout the seasons since I last drove it. So we're pretty much level pegging with our previous fastest lap time at the moment. As you can see, just a few hundredths of a second quicker, but when it comes to the guys up in front, they have now traded positions, P3 and P2. Shane is now up into P2 and David is now down in P3, but they're 6 to 6.5 seconds up the road. So I'm not really making any inroads on closing those guys down. And we've got a pretty decent gap to the driver behind now as well, so we don't need to worry about that. And the GTE car has now popped up at the top of the relative board, albeit he is a minute and a half up the road. Something to obviously keep an eye on. It will become a factor later on into the race once we start going through the lap traffic. Good run through the Mustang corner there. Hooking up the apex quite nicely. You kind of want to be getting as close to the bollards as possible on the inside. You don't really want to be driving the right hand side of the car through the bollards, because you will pick up a slow down penalty doing that. And then you obviously want to try and use the full available width of the circuit on the outside. You don't really get an off track or a slow down penalty going out there. You just obviously got the gravel to contend with. Running slightly deep through Indianapolis. That's the reason why I shifted down into first gear. Didn't quite bleed off the speed enough under braking. I kind of recognised that, so I dropped down into first just to kind of avoid understeering too much. Try and slow the car down a little bit more through the engine braking. Alright run there through the Porsche curves. Could have been a little bit tighter to a couple of the apexes. Could have had a smoother run coming out of it as well. It's really quite a difficult part of the Porsche curves, and quite a lot of time can be gained if you get it right. Forward chicane there was quite nice. You used to really be able to attack those curbs, especially those last two curbs going through the forward chicane, but as there's been tweaks to various damage models in iRacing, the car's a little bit more sensitive to floor damage if you really go and clobber those curbs. So it's kind of really stopped me from taking my my old line going through that, which in a way is a good thing. Makes it a little bit more realistic, but also slightly more frustrating because still not feeling 100% comfortable going through the forward chicane, sorry, and always feel like could be going just that little bit quicker. There again, I am comparing myself to old times. Oh, quite a bit of oversteer there coming out through the exit. Trying to apply the power, otherwise things were looking pretty good so far in that lap. As you can see, about a tenth of a second or so, maybe just under, up on the previous lap time. We're actually closing up onto the guys up in front as well. P2 we've now managed to get under the 6 second mark, and P3 has dropped off the back of him and is now about 4.5 seconds up the road, so we're closing up on them quite nicely. We'll obviously keep pushing, continue to close that gap down. See quite a bit of dirt and muck on the visor as well. So imagine we'll probably end up using a tear off relatively soon. As we've, my engineer was telling me we got about 2 laps of fuel left, but it's actually 2.5. laps of fuel left that we have, and P2 and P3 have swapped positions. A potential slowdown for one of the guys, or a mistake coming off of Mulsanne corner. Well, I haven't really gained any more ground. It's kind of, the gap is still around 5 seconds, but they've swapped positions. They're now very, very close to one another. If they're getting locked into a battle, it could help me in closing up onto the back of them. Much smoother run that time though, going through Indianapolis, and indeed they've actually gone and swapped positions once again, so they are trying to battle it out between the two of them. It's going to allow me to close up even more, gain about half a second or so there or thereabouts through Indianapolis and Arnage, and there's an LMP1 car coming back through the pack after an earlier pit stop. Imagine from the troubles earlier on in the race, we've also got another one that'll be coming up behind us relatively shortly. Being this far off the back of the LMP1 car isn't too bad, not really losing too much in terms of dirty and downforce, obviously losing a bit, but it's not too bad. Managed to get a decent run through that. And we're up on the previous fastest lap time as well. Just got to hope that he gets a good smooth run coming through. A forward chicane hit, and able to carry all the speed through, and you can see I'm a little bit more aggressive riding those curbs than some of the other drivers, which does allow me to close up a few temps coming out the exit, but caught that very final curb just a little bit too much. Did bounce the car a little bit and cost me slightly on traction, and of course the LMP1 car's got the hybrid as well, so he was always going to rocket away when he accelerates and the hybrid gets deployed. Things are looking very, very juicy now, in fact, for P3. Well, not very juicy, but looking a lot better than they were previously. The gap is now just over 2 seconds. As you can see, just double checking real quick the fuel there, making sure that things are pretty good. Yes, 2.5 seconds to the guy in front, P3. He's got the LMP1 car now in front of him, giving a little bit of a tow, annoyingly. There's not really much I can do about that. But yeah, have set up the strategy prior to actually beginning the race. Just whilst we were sat kind of stationary, just before the mini half formation lap, as it were. Just adjusted the fuel load that I want to be, or the amount of fuel that I want to be taking on in the pit stops. Also unchecking the tyres. Here comes the other LMP1 car. Passes me without any issue coming into the second chicane. Went a little bit deep there, braked just a little bit too late. Mainly cost me on the exit, as you can see. Not referencing the LMP1 car, but referencing my lap delta time, which was up over 2 tenths. Going through the mid part of the second chicane has now cost me a tenth or two. Fairly decent run through Mulsanne corner, although could have opened up the entry a little bit more, could have been out a little bit wider, which would have allowed me to carry a little bit more speed through the apex. Yeah, just looking at the amount of fuel going to be taking on in the pit stop, double checking how much fuel I've actually got in the tank as well to see how many more laps I can go with the 5.8 kilograms that I actually have. And according to the estimate, it was about 1.3, 1.4 laps. So it's going to be very, very tight approaching the pit entry, not pit exit, pit entry. So it may actually need to be this lap that I come in for the pit stop. And there you can see estimated laps remaining 1.2. So I'm not going to be able to do another lap. Just a quick adjustment to the fuel as well. So just kind of thinking in my mind how much fuel I'm actually going to need for the race. From the calculations that I'd made in testing, it worked out that I'd be needing to take on 34 litres of fuel, but I haven't really had too much slipstream here in this race, so I may have been using a little bit more. So I'm going to go with 37 litres, and yep, estimated laps has just ticked to 1.0 or 1.1. It's right on the borderline of the two, so I'm going to need to actually make the stop here. because otherwise, if I was to go for one more lap and I didn't do any fuel saving with some lifting and coasting or turning down the fuel mix, I'll be coming down the pit lane here, basically on fumes, and the car will be chugging along, which will obviously end up costing me time. So we had a pretty good run coming into the pit lane. Now it's just a case of nailing the pit box. Could have been a little bit quicker in. Got 0.3 optional repairs. 0.3 seconds that is. So not really too worried about that. I see the other guys are coming into there and parking up in their pit stalls as well. And we get underway. Wasn't going to take the optional repairs, just wanted to get back out as quickly as possible and as close to the guys in front as possibly can. So now accelerating back up to racing speed, and here comes the LMP1 leader. It's just under 5 seconds behind now, so it should pass relatively quickly, coming out onto the first Mulsanne straight, and they've gone and messed up the pit exit and coming into turns 2 and 3, and immediately got ourselves a slowdown penalty, which we're going to need to try and serve as quickly as possible, because otherwise coming through these corners it could potentially increase. We do a pretty good job of managing to clear it, but that is far from ideal, because that is going to cost us an awful lot of time and dropped us well off the back of the two guys in front. They're just pulling off a tear off on the visor of the helmet on the camera. But yeah, that was such a silly and stupid little error. Started braking at the right sort of point, just didn't get the car slowed down enough and properly turned in. As we've got an LMP1 car coming up behind her. Did move over across, wanting to try and basically keep him behind me coming into the first chicane here, but he actually had the speed and momentum to get on past before we got into the braking zone, and then got him stuffed up the exit of the first chicane here with quite a bit of oversteer. It's going to cost me even more time, as you can see, about a second down and climbing as we're coming down this straight, and the gap to P3 is about 5.5 seconds. So really not ideal start to this second stint. Would have been much closer if it wasn't for those two mistakes. But what's done is done. Need to get my head down, deal with the cards that I've been dealt, and try and make up for those errors. Still got a fair way to go in this race, another good 7 or 8 laps. Typically these HPDs can run to complete 18 laps in this race. Hopefully I got my fuel calculations and kind of estimate on the amount of fuel that I needed to take correct for this race to go the remainder of the distance. As you saw, I was a little bit unsure between a kilogram or 2 in fuel, but 37 litres is what we went with in the end. Hopefully that'll be enough. So now that we're actually into the second stint, although there is space between myself and the two guys up in front who have actually gone and swapped positions as well. David has now got himself back up into P2 and Shane's now back into P3. Yeah, what I was going to say is traffic comes into play here in this second stint. As you can see, we've had one LMP1 car, the race leader, come past us. Second and third aren't too far behind. Second is around about 4 seconds behind us. And of course, us being in the middle class of the 3 classes that you can race in here in the ILMS series, we will be catching some GTE cars later on. Fortunately for us, leader is diving into the pits, and oh, that's a car off to the left hand side. That's a freebie position. That is Shane as well, who was previously in second, dropped down into third after swapping positions with David, and then he's gone and made another mistake going into the 4th chicane there and was off in the wall on the left hand side. Not too sure if he was actually in the wall or whether he was just off there and managed to stop short and avoid getting any damage, just get some oversteer coming out the exit at turn 3. But Shane's managed to get back onto the track. It's about 7 seconds behind us, so we need to keep an eye on that gap there, because obviously relatively quick driver, fairly similar on pace, if not him slightly quicker than myself. So I need to make sure that he doesn't come back at me. So I need to be pretty clinical at this point. Get some good clean laps, although as you can see, half a second off on the previous fastest so far in this point of the race. But I think the best lap that I had done was done on lower fuel load, and therefore just generally quicker as you accelerate off the corners and get up to speed a fair amount quicker with the lighter car. Very, very close to picking up a slowdown penalty on the entrance to the first chicane there. It's basically right on the limit as to what is acceptable in terms of riding that curb. Just a quick look over to the mirrors with the TrackIR, just making sure I keep my head nice and loose and comfortable. You can kind of get yourself locked in into a slightly off-centered position with the TrackIR. So just looking in both directions, left and right, generally kind of tends to help that slightly, especially on a circuit like this where there's a lot more right-handers than there are lefts. I mean, there's not a huge amount more, but you know, it's a clockwise circuit, so you generally do go right more than you go left. Had to double take at the Mulsanne corner there, but still a pretty good run through, and actually a pretty good drive coming off the corner as well. 6 seconds is the gap between myself and David, who is actually also now in first position. Curiously, I'm marked as third. There was Fraser, who was previously leading in the HPD class, but he's somewhat disappeared off from the relative board somewhere along in this lap. And I think what actually happened was at the beginning of this lap he had peeled into the pit lane. Not entirely sure what for, possibly not taking enough fuel to make it to the end of the race, so maybe having to do a splash and dash. But I didn't actually realise at the time until kind of in and around this point in the lap, or maybe the beginning of the next one as well, when the position actually updated. So in the space of a lap we've gone from 4th position now up into 2nd place. Shane is, as I said, back out on circuit. He's now 8 seconds behind. And curiously, the time between myself and David has extended a fair amount going through the Porsche curves. I can see him there out on the track just up ahead of us. Not the tidiest of runs through the Ford chicane. The gap is kind of stabilised now around about 6 seconds. But as you can see from the relative, we've got some GTE traffic not too far up the road either, so that's going to be crucial here in this race. Obviously he's going to want to try and get through that as quickly as possible and not lose too much time. Obviously I want to do the same as well, but also what I want to try and do is see if I can close the gap to David in first position whilst he's trying to work his way through the traffic. Hopefully bring myself up closer into a position where if he does make a mistake, capitalise on that and actually try and battle for the race win. And the gap is now down to 5 seconds exactly, as you can see on the relative. Just having a quick look behind to see where the LMP1 cars are behind us. And there was one there on the relative board, but still a bit of a ways off, so don't really need to worry about him for the moment. There he goes, just popped onto the bottom, 14.5 seconds behind. But yeah, gap back down to 5 seconds now, which is good. Pushing on. I think David may have just made a mistake somewhere along the line, possibly picking up a slowdown penalty, which he managed to serve potentially out of turns 2 and 3. If you go out wide, the exit of turn 3, you can pick up a slowdown penalty out there. Likewise, obviously, if you do what I did and go too much across on the inside, you can also get a slowdown penalty, which you can clear reasonably quickly without losing too much time. But yeah, it is what it is. Gap's a nice 5 seconds, and we've actually gained a little bit of time there through the Mulsanne corner, as I think David got caught up behind one of the GTE cars, which is pretty good for us. Although he's managed to get that gap back up to over 5 seconds. We've got the LMP1 closing up behind as well. So we'll see how this plays out. Hopefully we can get past this GTE car fairly quickly and fairly easily. I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to be catching him coming up into the Porsche curves, but I should hopefully be able to clear him before we get into the middle of that. Otherwise I will end up losing quite a bit of time, as it's pretty difficult to go side by side with a GTE car through the Porsche curves. It's possible in the two right-handers, but in the two lefts it's very very difficult and risky. So I'm going to ease off the throttle here to try and basically get the momentum and timing right to pass him here in this right-hander. Sail on around the outside as he holds his line on the inside, which is good. Makes it nice and easy and predictable for me to get through that. And obviously with the car's added downforce, or downforce advantage shall I say, going around the outside is not a difficult task for the HPD. So that worked out very nicely. Played quite nicely into my hands, and as you can see I've gained about half a tenth of a second or so on David over the course of that lap, and kind of coming across the first one, maybe two GTE cars. We've got another one coming here, so we're going to take it relatively easy coming into turns 1 and 2 and try and line ourselves up for a decent exit. He was a little bit further over to the right hand side on the exit there than I would have liked him to have been. Kind of just compromised my exit off the corner a little bit more than it probably should have if he kind of took to the curbing on the outside, which is what I was expecting him to do. Thankfully the race leader in the LMP1 car has been patient through the S's there, and is waiting until after Tetra Rouge and when we're coming onto this straight here to make the pass under acceleration. So getting a little bit of slipstream as we're coming down towards the first Mulsanne chicane, but we do have a group of 2 or 3 GTE cars, 3 in fact, here immediately in front of us that we're going to have to contend with coming into the second chicane. Obviously the LMP1 car with its hybrid acceleration and the hybrid boost just going to blast and sail past these guys. David has already navigated his way through and gotten past them, so he may have lost some time. I'm hoping that I'm not going to lose too much time, but as we're coming into the second chicane here, I'm going to be able to pick one of these cars off but not the other two. Just didn't quite have the room there, so instead just going to have to sit in behind. Fortunately not losing too much time there, which is pretty good. Getting a little bit of slipstream in the acceleration before having to pull out. And a gap now to about 4.2 seconds, so we have gained a little bit more on David, which is good, but he's gone and put yet another GTE car between us and him, but he's got caught up behind the GTE. He's actually gone and spun one as well coming into the Mulsanne corner here. That was a pretty dangerous rejoin, if I'm going to be honest, by that GTE guy. I was hoping that he was going to remain stationary, but alas, he tried to rejoin the circuit in front of me. He forced me to go to the outside. Fortunately I managed to slow down and read the situation well enough, but now the big question is, did David cause that spin, or did the GTE just spin on its own? And if David did cause it through contact, whether he actually picked up any damage or not. Obviously time will tell in terms of lap timing and pacing between the two of us, but I'm hoping he has picked up a little bit of damage, because obviously that will allow me to close up a little bit more over the course of the next few laps. So we're both trying to work our way through this GTE traffic, so we should be able to clear this Porsche relatively quickly and before the Porsche curves, which indeed we do so. David has managed to clear 2 more GTEs, but he's got another one up in front of him, so I want to try and push through here through the Porsche curves, but I get the car very loose on the outside. That was quite a big moment at very high speed. That could have been very, very dangerous and potentially disastrous there, with the walls being so close, but just about managed to gather it back up. David's managed to clear these 3 GTE cars before the Ford chicane. caught up behind them slightly. I want to try and clear as many of these as possible before turns 1 and the braking zone for turn 2. Hopefully we can get this white Ferrari. The question is, are we going to be able to get this yellow Ferrari? So going down the inside of the white Ferrari in turn 1, just about managing to do that. Kind of committing to going to the inside a little bit early. I don't think he quite realised that I was going to be going that. And unfortunately, I'm managing to get past the that yellow GTE car relatively quickly coming out through the exit, and before we got to the S's, which is pretty good. And we're catching these two GTE cars at a pretty good time as well after Tetra Rouge coming out onto this long straight here, so we'll be getting the slipstream from them, which will play quite nicely into our hands. The gap still lurking in and around that 4.5 second mark at the moment, so neither of us have really gained or lost any real significant amounts of time. There's been little ebbs and drabs here and there, but it's kind of ebbed and flowed between the two of us. Times I've gained on him, times he's gained and pulled away from me. We're coming towards the end of the GTE traffic now as well. He's only got two more GTE cars to pass. In fact, he's gone and done one now for the second chicane. So I've still got third and second place in the GTE class to pass. And then one more, which will be P1, who I think is a bit further up the road. As the race leader in the LMP1 class hasn't passed him yet, and he's 20 seconds up the road from me, so it's quite a big gap between P1 and P2 in the GTE field. See, just lifting out and backing off slightly here in the approach to Mulsanne corners to try and basically carry the speed into and through the turn, but even still misjudged that a little bit. And had to get onto the brakes a little bit more, kind of semi-snagged them slightly just as we were coming into the apex. We've got two LMP1 cars up behind, and they're actually going for the split either side of myself, so fortunately it wasn't quite a three-wide situation. Managed to dart over to the right hand side after the first LMP1 car went through in order to facilitate the pass from the second, with also the GTE car in the mix as well, so pretty intense. These guys are battling away for second place, as you can see. Their battle slowing them down a little bit, and then even allowing me to close up on them, although they don't really use too much hybrid between Indianapolis and Arnage on that very short little straight there. Now they're actually going for a trade of positions going into Porsche curves. P3, Robert managing to get himself ahead of Luciano, who was in P2. Pretty good run there. Just out the exit of the Porsche curves. Pretty happy with that. Just coming into the 4 chicane once again. Obviously want to try and maximise the speed coming through. Just brushing the curbs before coming out through the exit. And the gap just under 5 seconds between myself and David. So even going through all that GTE traffic, as I said, gap hasn't really changed much at all. Hopefully these two LMP1 cars might come into play and potentially slow him down a little bit, because even if you are being lapped by a faster class car, it can sometimes hinder you going around the track, or hinder you into a corner. Very slight wiggle there, coming out through the top of the S's for Rouge. Which is quite a dangerous place to lose the car as well. It's quite high speed. If you dip the wheels out onto the grass on the outside there, it's pretty easy to end up spinning. And the walls are pretty close, and they're solid Armco barriers as well, so if you go into one of them in that section, generally it's an awful lot of damage, unless you get very lucky and only just skim the Armco barrier. And there is the GTE leader, 28 seconds up the road. So he's got a pretty comfy and significant gap to second place. Very much a dominant performance by him. Shane's popped up onto the relative board behind as well. It looks like we've gained a bunch of time on him, as he's now 10.5 seconds back. Possibly suffering from some damage from earlier on. Imagine the skidding across the track as well, and off to the side has probably taken a bit of life out of his tyres. Another half decent run through Mulsanne corner there. Just the very tiniest of lockups, just as a starting turn into the corner. Was a little bit shy off the apex, but still not too bad. And as the fuel load has come down to 16 odd kilograms, we're hanging pretty close to our previous fastest lap. It was at this point as well that I was starting to feel much more comfortable with the car, kind of back in familiar territory from how I remember it being when I used to drive it an awful lot, and used to get some very strong performances here at Le Mans and also various other circuits as well. So I feel very much like I'm coming back into form, and currently holding P2 in class as well. Obviously a very, very good result. If could finish in that position, hopefully will give us a nice good chunk of iRating back after losing some in the previous few races. Hopefully this will be the start of the journey to getting that 4K iRating. So it seems like David's been putting in some pretty consistent laps with some very solid race pace, as I end up going and picking up a slowdown penalty, running it out a little bit too wide out on the exit of Tetcheroos. Didn't quite get the car brought back over far enough back onto the track before the end of the curving that's out there. But yeah, David has managed to get the gap up to about 5.5 seconds. And with the slowdown as well, he's obviously, the gap's going to be even bigger now. Yeah, coming out the exit of the chicane, it's now 6.5 seconds. So he's been putting in some very solid pace over the last couple of laps. Been very consistent. It's been a bit quicker than I have been, pulling away. Just double checking how much time is actually left in the race as well. We've got about 4.5 minutes remaining, plus obviously however long it takes for the race leader to finish and complete that lap. 12.5 kilograms of fuel should just about be enough to see us to the checkered flag. But at this point, with the amount of time remaining, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to close up the 6.5 to 7 second difference between myself and David. So it's more just about holding on to this this P2, kind of consolidating that, making sure I keep that nice buffer to Shane behind, and that I don't make any mistakes. But also obviously don't want to back off too much to avoid making mistakes, to the point that if David goes and makes one, I'm not going to be there close enough to capitalise on it. That was quite a nice little reminder from the engineer. 2 laps of fuel, which usually comes up when there's 2.5 estimated laps of fuel remaining, which is ideal because it's probably going to be 2 more laps worth of running, because I don't think we get the white flag this time around coming into the start of this lap, and indeed we don't, because it would have come up on the screen by now. So it seems like we got the fuel calculation just about right to get ourselves to the end. So now I just need 2 laps of no mistakes, solid paces to get very, very sideways coming out the exit of the Dunlop chicane there. Getting hard on the accelerator. Just breaking traction on the rear. That time I managed to get the car back over far enough to avoid getting a slowdown penalty, despite being out a little bit wide out there. But yeah, I managed to get ourselves back far enough back across the curb onto the track again, whilst also trying to maintain the speed going through the corner. Smooth run through that first chicane. We're now closing up onto the back of the GTE leader as well. Just goes to show how much pace he's had, because we've obviously cleared the rest of the GTE field a good couple of laps ago. It's taken us this long to close up onto the back of him, so he's got some serious pace under his belt. Very dominant performance. We should clear him quite easily coming off of Mulsanne corner and going down the next straight on the run towards Indianapolis. So we'll just leave ourselves a bit of room here coming into Mulsanne corner to get the speed and drive through the turn that I need, and then picking up the slipstream under acceleration there, slingshot ourselves past. Gap between myself and David now over 7 seconds. Good drive there coming off Arnage. Good smooth run through the Porsche curves, although it's very close to getting the slowdown penalty out on the exit. And here we go. Final lap of the race, which is obviously a relief to see, considering I've only got 6 kilograms of fuel thereabouts remaining for this lap, and my engineers told me I've just got one lap of fuel left. You usually get informed about when you've got 1.5 estimated laps of fuel remaining. Through Tetra Rouge from one last time. Pretty decent run through there. No, not quite as committed as fastest lap, because as you can see the lap delta is increasing. We've got an NMP1 car coming up behind us as well. someone that's currently sat in 5th position. A little bit deep there, a bit rough around the edges, going through the first chicane, but kept it on the track, kept it out of the walls, which is the main thing. We've actually got an LMP1 quite slow up ahead as well. You see we're closing up on him quite easily coming down these straights here. There goes, it's currently 5th position, but it's probably very soon to become 4th position, as I think the LMP1 car that is slow here either has quite a lot of damage, which does seem a little bit on the right rear, as you can see. He's got some damage on the right side of his car. So yeah, it's probably a mixture of damage, also possibly fuel as well. Possibly just turn the engine mix right down to try and make it to the last lap, running a little bit short. Doing some fuel saving. But that's going to cost him 4th position, at least. So we're into Indianapolis for one last time. Almost losing the rear of the car there. Rear tyres starting to give up a little bit, which is what I was experiencing on the old setup a lap or two prior to this and the stage of the race. So the tweaks that I had made, as recommended by a couple of guys from the team, certainly helped out in that department. Just made the car feel much better to drive as well throughout the entirety of the stint, which meant that when it came to the end, the tyres were still pretty much there, but obviously odd little moments from not being careful. But here we go, last couple of corners for the last time in this race. Bounce over the one on the inside and across the line for 2nd place. Pretty pleased with that. Pretty solid race considering started back in 6th place, made a few overtakes. Not really too many mistakes apart from the major one coming out the exit of the pit lane, which cost us the potential for the race win. And that has kicked off our journey on the road to 4K, where in this race I gained 52 iRating and jumped back up to an iRating of 3,847. So very, very pleased about that one, and hopefully the next couple of rounds will go well. We can get some solid performances and solid races in there, and hopefully try and achieve that 4K relatively soon. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. If you don't want to miss out on any future content on the channel, then consider hitting that subscribe button with the bell notification. That way you get alerted to each and every video that I upload. Otherwise, until the next time, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully I shall see you soon, but until then, have fun, stay safe, and take care.